And hello, we want to welcome everybody to the Thriving Schoolhouse Podcast. This podcast is done in collaboration with New Era Superintendents. I'm Eric Tornfeld. I am the host. Really excited today for our podcast episode. We have David Spellmon with us. David is a fantastic contributor to the field of education. Our topic today will be social emotional learning, community development, and hip hop. And again, our guest today is David Spellmon. David is an experienced behavioral specialist with a demonstrated history of working in the primary and secondary education industry. He's also the CEO and founder of Positive Archer Solutions, an educational consulting firm that specializes in culturally responsive social emotional learning, building positive school culture, and boosting up the social capital of students. He is a national speaker who is presented at the National Alternative Education Association Conference, the Global Conference on Hip Hop Education, African American Male Teacher Initiative at Houston Tillotson University in New Jersey, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, and the Building Our Network of Diversity Conference. He's also written for many educational blogs, most notably Edutopia. We are welcome to have on the podcast today Mr. David Spellmon. Mr. Spellmon, as I also know you as Spell, what did I miss in my introduction that I just provided?
Well, first and foremost, I appreciate you, Dr. Tornfeld, for this opportunity. But everything is, I would say, pretty much there. The only thing I would add is I am a disruptor in the educational space. That's what I like to think about myself. As we'll talk, a little bit later on during this episode, I like to look at myself as a disruptor, but glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, we're going to jump right in. And just for our listeners, again, the purpose of the Thriving Schoolhouse podcast, we seek to dialogue about issues that are happening in education and identify innovative solutions and innovative ideas that promote the thriving of schools nationwide. And so Mr. Spellmon is doing just that. And so my first question for you, David, is, how do you see what is your current role within the American education system? So as we look out on the landscape of American education, you are doing something very unique in your role. What is that role, and how are you contributing to American education right now?
Well, I feel like it's very unique because I do work for a public K-12 school district. And in that role, it's very similar to what I'm doing outside of my day job, but on different levels. So during the day, I'm what they call a core behavior specialist. So I work with administration teams, with their MTSS, everything happening at that core level. So we like to say we work on the ABCs of education. So everything concerning attendance, behavior, coursework, and then that S would be social and emotional learning. But outside of my day job, as you mentioned, I am an educational consultant, and my claim to fame is writing a book and curriculum of merging or that intersection of hip hop and social and emotional learning. So when I'm speaking of using hip hop in the education, during school hours or in the educational space, I'm not saying we're going to make beats, we're going to rap. I'm really looking and dissecting lyrics and then connecting them to social and emotional learning. So one of the 5 core Castle's core competencies is, to me, like I said, being a disruptor, we needed innovation when it came to social and emotional learning. We needed innovation when it came to connecting with certain populations of students on our campuses and just bringing everybody up, speaking specifically to their culture or their interests. And when I say hip hop, it's not just saying, hey, this is specifically for brown and black students. If any student, whatever their interests are, whatever their culture is, it needs to be brought into the schoolhouse. Of course, my method is hip hop, but this can be done in many ways, all through the concept of culturally responsive instruction.
So I know some of our listeners are probably going to ask the question, who is your hip hop? Like if Mr. Spellmon is going to be listening to hip hop on his own, who are some of the hip hop influences for you that one you enjoy listening to, but kind of also maybe motivated you to do some of this work? Like how did you get to that point?
I always say this, and I have to always give this example because I need people to go back. So when I'm speaking of using hip hop, I'll admit it's more difficult to use the artists of today. And I am mid-30s, so I came from that golden era. So my number one group and or artist that I would refer to when looking or thinking of ways to integrate hip hop when it doesn't have a negative connotation is A Tribe Called Quest. So I must say this. The album Midnight Marauders, if you've ever listened to it, they have these little interludes between songs. And this one interlude specifically taught me a vocabulary word. So it goes like, the title of this program is Midnight Marauders. You know, the reason they call it Midnight Marauders because they gave some stats and data around a certain percent of people listen to their music at night. Okay, which hence the midnight part. But then the narrator goes on to further say, to maraud means to loot. In this case, we loot for ears. So Midnight Marauders. So as a young person, I'm like, I've never heard the word marauders, but I learned through hip hop, through A Tribe Called Quest, a vocabulary word that I use to this day. Whenever I see marauders, I'm like, oh, I know what that means. When I never got taught that in school. Never was that a vocabulary word during school, but I learned that from a hip hop album. So that just really started sparking my brain to say, you know what? I understand hip hop has negative connotations, drug references, misogyny, everything you can say about hip hop. But then on the other side of things, hip hop does present ways for you to learn new vocabulary. There's a lot of artists who talk about positive things too, but I just know mainstream focuses on, or, their entertainment value when they're talking about all the nonsense. But definitely A Tribe Called Quest, namely Phife Dawg, of course Q-Tip, but Phife Dawg, rest in peace. He was an artist that really did a lot of merging with sports and popular culture in their music as well. And of course, me coming up, watching ESPN every day before school, Stuart Scott, Rich Eisen, just the way he did his wordplay. And you can learn other like literary techniques from listening to A Tribe Called Quest. But the way Phife Dawg merged positive, concepts with sports analogies, sports references, it just really did something for me as a young person growing up. Because I wasn't so interested in the, shoot 'em up, bang, bang type of hip hop.
Right. And it's interesting you even say that. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think connecting with something from your growing up, right? Like I can't relate. I didn't listen to A Tribe Called Quest, but you made me want to listen to it right now, like this afternoon, right? But I can relate with waking up and watching Sports Center every day before school too, right? And where those things connect and there are those shared experiences, and how do we connect some of those things with our kids and what's going on in the schoolhouse to help them thrive. I love hearing that, and I'm going to listen to a little Tribe Called Quest later. When we think about, what you're doing, like why do you see this as important work for the benefit of teachers, students, the field of education as a whole? Like why is social emotional learning, hip hop, like why are you doing this? I mean, you've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but when you kind of share that, or when your consulting company shares that and makes that pitch to school districts, what are the contributions that you feel like you're making, and how do you even measure that?
I'll say this. When it comes to social and emotional learning, this is daily life. I know it's a buzzword these days, but if you really do your research and break down those 5 core competencies, everybody could benefit. And I've said it numerous times. Everybody can benefit from social emotional learning, whether you are living under the poverty line, whether you are affluent, Black, white, Asian, Latino, an alien, green, whatever your skin color is, whatever your religious preference is, everybody could benefit from goal setting. Everybody's going to benefit from knowing how to solve conflicts appropriately. Everybody's going to benefit from knowing when I have a setback, how do I persevere? So I hate when we say these things are only for certain parts of the population. Every single person with a beating heart in their body could glean something from this. Of course, some people have higher levels of self-efficacy, but we're still working on things in our life. And I'll say that when the question is the contributions to teachers, to students, to their families, to the communities, I really feel like there is a deficit in self-efficacy, not just when it comes to academic things, but there's personal goals that people want to accomplish as well that they might not feel as confident in. So if I can develop that self-efficacy muscle for out of school, guess what? The byproduct is now I have greater self-efficacy during school hours. So just from my standpoint, from my viewpoint, if we can help young people and old people, because sometimes, people go through life and they don't develop certain things. So even as adults, even as these instructors, if I can touch both the students and the staff in building their social emotional learning skills, it creates a greater sense of community, better relationships. And there's just so much research that when there's relationships or improved school climate and culture, academics will go up because all of these things are byproducts of building a school community and culture. So that's really the pitch. But then more so, I would be doing myself a disservice if I said I am working with a lot more Title I schools, more urban communities, because those Black and brown kids are going to resonate more with hip hop. And then that creates another issue. Why do those schools, academic, not to say the standards are lessened, but when we look at the testing, when we look at the grades, typically they're lower than their white counterparts or just other counterparts in general. So how can I find a creative way to use their culture and their interests to still maintain rigor? And I think that's what separates what I'm doing from other individuals in this hip hop ed space. Yes, I am bringing the culture into the classroom, but I'm not saying we're doing this without standards, because once you read a literary text, i.e. lyrics, that is now speaking to their English language arts standards, reading comprehension. When I throw in those vocabulary words, depending on what grade level, everything that I'm doing with my curriculum is part of their English language arts standards or their curriculum that they should be doing in the schoolhouse. I'm just, packaging it in a way that is easily digestible to say, oh, I did not know I could get this lesson from this hip hop song, but I still have to read the text. I still have to comprehend what is the theme. What was the author trying to say once I read this chapter? All those things are still embedded into the curriculum. So when I say I'm using hip hop, it's not, like I said, making beats or just using it in a very surface level type of way. No, there's substance with hip hop pedagogy. But to the untrained eye and ear, you just hear hip hop in the schoolhouse. Oh, I don't know about that. But there's so many different ways to be innovative in bringing hip hop or bring just anybody's culture. Because I think about my multi-language learners. How can I incorporate the Latino, Spanish, Hispanic culture in my curriculum to have it speak to them? So it's not just a minority thing. And I've worked with affluent school districts as well. I might have to throw in some Taylor Swift because that's what's going to resonate with those students. So when I'm saying culture, it's really the culture of the young people that are in front of you, not just culture in the sense of what are the differences. Oh, they don't speak this language or their skin's a little bit darker. No, culture is the community in front. Everybody should have a classroom culture, be it as it may. So what is your culture needing from you as that instructor?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think about how, you're just shining a light on what people are writing and saying and doing, right? And we've been doing that for years, right? Like when I read a poem from Robert Frost when I was in high school, it's artwork. It's all artwork, right? And people are just putting their thoughts on paper, and then we're dissecting it as teachers and students and saying, okay, what does this say? What does it really say? What is the context of it? And all of those things. When we think about education, and you're in schools practically day to day, and then you're in districts all over the country, and you've seen a lot of things, what do you think is something that's not currently happening in education that you wish was happening? Like, what would be an innovative thing that you wish you would see when you go and you visit these other districts?
So I must do this because I too had to learn that poem in high school. So I have to say, in reference to your question, making the road less traveled will make all the difference. My biggest issue with education is it looks so much of what it did during the Industrial Revolution. Some schools still have kids sitting in rows and desks. Like, these are a different generation of kids. I feel like I was the last generation. And like I said, I'm in my mid-30s of boom, this is the way it is. Do as you're told, not as we do. These new kids, these new generation of kids, they're coming with a lot of entitlement. They just have a different way of thinking. So we have to speak to them, and it has to modify. So what I feel like what's missing is a lot more project-based learning and or bringing it back to the essence. As technology has really taken off, the kids don't have those, and I hate to say soft skills, but they don't have the people skills. They don't know how to really connect with people outside of a screen. I have students, I have people in my family that they have all these friends, but they're simply on the game that they're playing. It's Roblox, it's Fortnite, or they're in my chat online. And I'm like, have you ever met these people? And they look at me like it's a foreign concept when, of course, when I was growing up, you were riding your bikes around the neighborhood with your friends every day. Like, it was much more peer-to-peer interaction, and you had to deal with things even outside the context of a classroom. So if you can handle a conflict in the neighborhood, you probably do a good job of handling it in school because you've had that experience. Now it's just, I'm behind the screen, and that is our interaction. So what's missing is really bringing it back to the essence, or trying to find that perfect marriage of technology and those essential skills of, hey, yes, I understand everything's on a computer, but when you go into the real world, into your job, there's a team of people on a computer that you have to work with, and there's going to be some real life interactions. And if you've never had those experiences, it's going to be tough as you get into that, I'll use a sports reference, like there's practice, then when the lights come on, it's game time. And I feel like a lot of students really drop the ball when it's game time and they have to do it in real life because they've never had the opportunities or they haven't had enough practice to do it. So we really need to create more opportunities during school to prepare them for these real life situations as they matriculate through life.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there too, as far as our screens. We're using a screen right now to record this podcast, so I'm thankful for technology. But it is that addiction, and I hate seeing, going out to dinner with my family, and I'll look over, and undoubtedly I'll see at least one kid who, instead of engaging with his family, he's watching a show on his iPad or iPhone, and the parents are just disengaged. And I know there's probably people going to listen to this and say, "Ooh, that's me." But those types of things where authenticity in relationships and trying to build those relationships is a little bit of a lost art. Yes. I want to ask you, Spellmon, about how you feel like, one of the things in our schools, and in order to have truly a thriving schoolhouse, as this podcast is all about, is that we ultimately have to improve student achievement in math and in reading. And kids need to be able to read. Kids need to be able to do math problems. And how do you feel like your work and this topic today about hip hop and social emotional learning, how do you feel like this is affecting students' abilities to achieve in the areas of math and reading?
Well, I'll definitely say this. My focus is definitely English language arts, so that reading component, and I'll give a little background why. So the listeners of the Thriving Schoolhouse Podcast, if this is your first time hearing what I'm about to say, I really need to marinate in your brain as you're working with your students. So as I was coming up as a young person, I would always hear this constant thing. A lot of the older people in my family or just older people in my community would say, I need you to take reading and learning how to read and all of that very important because they used to say, if you wanted to hide something from a Black person, put it in a book. So during my formative years, I was constantly hearing that, and I of course went totally against it. I'm like, so what are they trying to say? I knew what they were trying to say. Unintelligent, we don't care. And I'm like, that didn't sit right with me. But as I've gone through my life and now my career working in education, I can see why, not even that they need to hide it from anybody. No. We don't even take the time to read and just do the things to seek knowledge and advance ourselves. And it's so funny because, of course, I'm looking at this example from secondary, so middle and high school. Of course, as kids are going through puberty, my young men, They want to work out all the time. They want to get their bodies right. They want to look good, quote unquote. But at the same time, they never work out their mind. The way they're working out their body, and I simply say, how do you work out your mind in a similar fashion? I get blank stares. They don't understand that correlation of, if I gain knowledge, my brain grows. That's, as I read, I'm working out my brain. And then that whole concept of, once your brain expands, it can never go back to that original form. So I really try to help my students understand there's nothing wrong with seeking knowledge, with learning how to read. As a group of kids right now, if we're in a setting, who wants to read? There may be some kids that never put their hands up, or when you call on them, they may act out because they've never really gained that ability, or maybe they don't read well. But that's the thing. The only way you get better at something is by doing it. And they don't put, maybe not just them, but society or their family, they don't place emphasis on those things. I'll come to the sporting event on Friday nights, but when you send home, hey, I need you to read with your kid 30 minutes a day, they don't take that as important, or it's not a priority like some other things. So everything that I'm doing is really focused on boosting that reading ability, that reading comprehension, because that goes to all disciplines. You're asking about math and ELA, but even if I don't know how to read, how can I read my math word problem to even get to the right formula? So to me, the foundation is being able to read, to articulate information, and then also to convey it back. Once I've read it, once I've done that whole process of critical thinking, I need to be able to let you know what I read, or what are my thoughts about what I read. So for me, ELA is the foundation for a student's success. Mm-hmm. So everything that I'm doing, that's why I have the intersection of hip hop, because it's lyrics, it's literary text that speaks directly to English language arts. I need to find ways that if it's through lyrics, if it's through a video game magazine, if it's through reading a box score, I need them, if that's what they're interested in, hey, let's start to develop those muscles of reading through the ways that they like. Of course, because of the curriculum, we'll have to get into the Shakespeare's. We'll have to go to revisit Robert Frost. But once they have the foundational ability to read, then I can teach them those, ancillary skills, or introduce them to new authors or new subject matter. But first, they got to be interested. And what is the way I get them interested? And I think that's pretty much how I'm doing, or why I'm doing what I'm doing. If the entry is through hip hop first, to get them to start reading, then we can branch off. Then that's the route I want to take.
Mm-hmm. David, where did you get that communication? Going back to your point earlier, who told you if you want to hide it from Black people, put it in a book? Where was that messaging coming from when you were growing up?
Family members and people of my community. Not just Black people. I grew up in a very diverse community, and it was just something that was common knowledge that, certain people were supposed to be inferior, or they're not as smart. There's just those stereotypes. And I even have a lot of Asian friends. I used to live in Guam, and now, the perception is, Asian people are good at math. And I have a lot of friends that would tell you that's not true. But just these stereotypes and these misconceptions that just have lived for longer than you and I have been alive. Yeah, that just really lit a fire within me to say, well, since if you hide something from me, you put it in a book, let me write a book to let you know that I don't agree with that. So that was part of, me wanting to do the work that I'm doing currently. Is no, there's intelligence in all races. There's intelligence in all people if they seek it. Now, if you choose not to seek knowledge, that's not a Black or white, Latino or Asian thing. That's just a personal preference. So I hate the stigmas or the misconceptions or just the negative things that go with certain people. And of course, with me being a Black man, I've heard them all. There's nothing new that anybody can tell me about my race, because I'm yeah, I've heard it, but do I agree with it? No. Do you agree with it? That's your personal preference, but I know I don't subscribe to that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, Mr. Spellmon, this has been fantastic to meet with you today and for you to be a part of the Thriving Schoolhouse podcast. As we close today, I want to ask you if there's a superintendent that's listening or a district personnel that want to be involved with Positive Archer Solutions, how do they get in touch with you? What do you do? What do you want to share with any administrator in a district that may be interested in your services?
Absolutely. So, of course, you can go to the website, positivearchersolutions.com. Also, I've got a lot of traction on LinkedIn. So, David Spellmon on LinkedIn. And what I'm offering, and this is the thing, of course, it is a product, but it sells itself. If you have teachers who need professional development and connecting with students that may not look like them, or culturally, because you can be a Black person and grow up very different than some of the Black students in your own, city or the classroom that they're serving. If you feel like you have an issue with climate and culture, I would say definitely reach out. Or if you know your student body population is very engaged in hip hop, I would say you need to call me yesterday because I want to show you how using hip hop culture doesn't have to be a negative thing. How hip hop can present a lot of positive attributes that boost up that social and emotional learning. And that's really where what I'm all about is using hip hop culture to boost up those social and emotional learning skills while I'm embedding English language arts. So also, if you have kids that are having trouble with reading comprehension, and I'm speaking mostly to secondary students, or even want to boost up the vocabulary, reach out. PositiveArcherSolutions.com, David Spellmon on LinkedIn. Like I said, you can Google my name. You'll see a lot of articles that I've written. I'm very passionate about this work because I know students need something different. Like I said, I like to think of myself as a disruptor because the status quo, it hasn't worked for numerous amount of years. And now that I'm just really, this groove of the work that I'm doing, I'm definitely pushing back on the status quo.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why we are here today is what's worked will not necessarily work moving forward. And so we want to have schools across the country that are truly thriving. And how do we do that? It's through good people in those schools, it's through good ideas, and it's through innovation. And so, David, again, I want to say thank you for joining us today. If you're listening and you want to get in touch with David, again, LinkedIn for David Spellmon, but then it's positivearchersolutions.com, correct?
Yep.
Okay. PositiveArcherSolutions.com. Again, this is the Thriving Schoolhouse Podcast produced in collaboration with New Era Superintendents. This podcast focuses on exploring innovative ideas that promote the thriving of schools nationwide. I'm Eric Tornfelt, your host, and thank you again for joining us today.